know some of you guys are just meeting me for the first time, but I feel like this is a safe place. I can be honest with you guys. I had to teach Midway last night. Are you guys familiar with Midway? So just between you and me, I was a little nervous about having to talk to the middle schoolers, but I survived. So, but I thought maybe some of you guys still remember what it was like to be in middle school. How many of you guys can still remember what it was like to be in middle school? And I'll bet even where you're at, like even today, you could probably think of things that you wish you knew when you were in middle school that maybe could have helped you out a little bit as you became the all-powerful high schoolers that you are. There's a lot of things that I wish I knew when I was younger. And you know, I'm a lot older than you guys. I'm realizing really old, like I was born in the last century, right? Not the only one here. But there are things that I think could have made my life a lot easier if I had known them when I was your age. And one of those things is how to listen well. So that's kind of going to be just the one big thing that I want to share with you guys tonight. We're talking about listening. This is our Godspace series. And I'm going to start and end the night with just asking a question, which is, who are you listening to? So I want to read to you James 1:19 through 21. Know this, my beloved brothers and sisters, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Therefore put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. Eric, do we have verse 19? So would you guys just read together with me verse 19? Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Now, the reason that I think listening is a really important thing for us to talk about tonight is not just because it's a good life skill to have, but that it really seems that it's disappearing in our culture today, right? Like it's something that we're less and less able to do well. You guys might be aware last year there was an election right about this time of year. And one of the things that stuck with me from that election was they did a poll. And in that poll, they found that 80% of the country believed that we were either completely, totally, or at least mostly a divided country. That's 8 out of 10 people. So like 8 out of 10 people thought that as a country we are divided, totally divided. Now, if you think that's bad, a full 90% of those people thought that the division, especially when it comes to politics, political things, was a serious problem for our country, like existential crisis level. And so more good listening, it seems, would be a good thing for us all to have, but we seem like it's just like kind of slipping away, like we are less and less able to do it. And there was another poll from earlier this year that I think is also important here. And this was the opening line of the article based on it. The social media generation is the one that feels the most alone. And in that study, they shared a statistic, which is a full 30% of millennials, which is, you guys know what millennials are? Anybody? So ages 32. Oh, okay. So people ages 32, 23 to 38. So millennials, 30% of millennials feel alone either most or all the time. But one of the things is that in most of these demographic things, the trend lines are going up. So if millennials feel that alone, then most things are even more dramatic for you guys. Now, even though it's the highest in millennials, which they were studying, that feeling of aloneness was up across the board, all ages. And so one of the things that tells us is that statistically, like our community, which even like people in this room, like there are some of you in this room that feel alone. And it's kind of one of the paradoxes of our time, right? Like we live in a time where there's more technology to keep us connected than there has ever existed in the history of the planet, right? And yet, more people feel alone now than at any time since we actually started measuring that kind of thing. And so I don't want to oversimplify the problem and say that, oh, it's just because we're listening to different things. There's still probably a lot of books that are going to be written about how messed up we all were in 2019. But I think no matter which way you look at it, you have to realize that there's a big factor of what's going on in culture that has to do with how we communicate or how we don't communicate. Because I think we cannot get past loneliness, right? Like we can't overcome loneliness without connecting with other people, without connecting with somebody else. But we can't connect with other people without communicating. And we can't communicate without listening. So who are you listening to? And I'm just going to kind of ask that a couple of different ways throughout the next few minutes. Now the first way that I want to talk about listening might sound a little funny, but I think it's a helpful way to think about it. And it's listening as worship. Now, I think you guys have probably figured this out already, but every second of every day of your life, there are things competing for your attention. Here's a fun fact. Did you know that this year, they're projecting the total advertising dollars spent in the United States is going to be over $238 billion. Over $238 billion people are spending to try to get your attention. And why is that mostly, do you think? Like, they want to sell you stuff, right? They want to create in you a desire for a product or a brand. Does anybody here have an iPhone 11? Nobody here has an iPhone 11? Ooh. No, what, iPhone 11 Pro, maybe? Oh, okay, one. Okay, so you're not allowed to answer this question. How many cameras does an iPhone 11 Pro have on the back? Oh, okay, so Apple is talking and you guys are listening, right? Like you guys are listening to Apple. And that's not necessarily good and bad on its own, but we need to realize that when we listen to things, whether it's advertising or even news or people that you are encountering at school, when you listen to somebody, you are giving them a value. Like you are assigning a value to somebody based on how you are listening to them. And here's what I mean by that. If my wife's named Ashley, if my wife Ashley says that a certain shirt I want to buy is ugly and I shouldn't buy it, but some random Amazon review says like, oh, this is the coolest shirt that there could ever be, who should I listen to? I should listen to my wife. You guys know that. Because I should value what my wife says more than some random Amazon review, right? That's probably fake anyway. So deciding who we listen to is a value system, right? Like it's a way that we are listening to people, we are intaking things that will affect our behavior, it will affect how we see the world. Why do you think companies are spending over $200 billion just to get you to listen to them? So here's another fun fact. This year, 2019, is projected to be the first year in history that digital advertising overtakes traditional advertising in dollars spent. So that means over half of that $238 billion is spent online advertising, right? Social media ads, mobile ads, on the web, more than TV, radio, paper, newspapers, magazines. And why do you think that is? Because what? More people are online, right? Like advertising dollars go where the eyeballs are, right? So where people are is where people spend money for advertising. And there are a lot of people listening to what is being said through online and electronic stuff, social media, particularly young people, right? Like younger people are generally more listening to those types of things. And so again, I just want to kind of ask the question, like as a society, how are we doing? Like, do you think some of these things are affecting us positively or negatively? Right? Like, is it good or bad? Another kind of sad statistics. From 2007 to 2017, people ages 18 to 34 saw a 69% increase in alcohol-related deaths, 108% increase in drug-related deaths, and a 35% increase in death by suicide. And there's actually a term for those. Like, there's a really sad term for those, which is deaths of despair. And those have increased across all age groups in the last 10 years, but more so among younger people. And again, I don't want to oversimplify big problems, but and blame it all on advertising and social media. But I think it would be equally as foolish to think that that's not part of the equation at all, that it doesn't factor in, that it's not affecting us. You know, who are we listening to? Who are we listening to the most? Who we listen to the most is a good indicator of what we value the most. Like whatever we decide is the most worthy thing in our life to listen to is obviously very important to us. Now we have spiritual language for this, right? Like if we're talking spiritual things, we're talking, those are the things we worship. And nearly everything, every aspect of unredeemed culture is inviting us to worship something other than God. Whether that is self-image, or whether that's money, or career, or friends. It's not God. And if we are being shaped by those things, then no wonder we're falling apart. No wonder we're more divided than ever. No wonder people are more lonely than ever. No wonder deaths of despair are on the rise. We were not created to worship these other things. What were we created for? What were we created to worship? What's the first book of the Bible? Genesis, yeah. So back at the very beginning of the story of the human race, right? Genesis 1, God gets to work creating things, right? God creates people. And in the Garden of Eden, when everything was perfect, there was no loneliness, there was no bitterness, there were no deaths of despair. God actually said at the very beginning, part of the story of the Bible, the only thing in all of creation that God said wasn't good, the only statement he made about anything that was not good was, it's not good for man to be alone. People, men and women, were made in the image of God. And part of what that means to be made in God's image is that we were created to have a special, unique relationship with God, different from any other part of creation. We were built to communicate with God, to listen to God. Now, how we listen to God, it's not super complicated. One of the ways that we listen to God is through the words that he gave us in the Bible. Now, the passage in James that we were reading, I love kind of the New Living Translation. It words it like this. Humbly accept the word God has planted in your hearts, for it has the power to save your souls. Friends, listen to the words God plants in your hearts. And then in James, he says, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. And doesn't that sound like pretty much the exact opposite of how we operate today? Like most of us, rather than being quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, aren't most of us pretty quick to offer our opinion on things, like throw out our take on it, and have a pretty short fuse with people who disagree with us, and rarely have time to actually listen to people? Which is the second thing, listening as service. So, number 2 is listening as service. Now, I said there's kind of 2 ways you can take the question, who are you listening to? One is, who are you letting speak into your life? Who are you letting form and shape the way you see the world? The second is, who are you listening to? It goes right along with this idea of Godspace, right? That how do we serve the people in our lives by listening to them well? And we have to kind of answer the first question before we can get into the second one. Because if we're listening to God in our hearts through His Spirit, then we will listen well to the people around us. Now, last week we talked about serving, about doing good things, right? Meeting tangible needs of people around us. And I think listening is actually kind of similar to that, like it's connected. Have you ever thought about the fact that just being present with somebody and like giving them your attention and listening well is like giving them a gift, right? It's like serving them, it's like meeting a need for them. In Matthew chapter 12, Jesus says this, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. The good person out of the good treasure brings forth good. The evil person out of his evil treasure brings forth evil. I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak. For by your words you're justified, and by your words you'll be condemned. So there's a connection here, I think, between listening to God so that we can be good and helpful listeners to others. James says, accept the word God plants in your hearts. Jesus says we actually store things up in our hearts that we draw from later when we interact with people. So in other words, like what goes in will come out, right? Like what you take in, you will give out. If you listen to God as worship, like you will listen in service to other people. The author of the book Godspace says this, and I think it's really, really helpful. Nothing creates Godspace faster than spirit-led listening. When we demonstrate that we are truly seeking to understand people, not simply change their point of view, we create a safe environment that allows them to open up at a deeper level. As others feel genuinely understood, they also begin to better understand themselves. So practically, like, there are good and bad ways to do this, right? Chapter 5 of Godspace, there's a section called reflective listening phrases that I found pretty helpful. A couple things like, if I'm hearing you, like as you're talking to somebody, you can repeat back to them, like, if I'm hearing you right, you're saying blank. Or, so you're saying, and you can kind of summarize what they're saying, or how they're feeling because of, and then summarize that too. Reflect it back to them. Really helpful. Practice this on your family when you get home, or in your small groups. But I think we also need to be conscious of the things that we do that work against good listening, right? Things that actually will communicate to other people that we don't care about them. I think that most of us who have been Christians for a while are probably guilty of this. So here are two top examples that were also from chapter 5 of Godspace that I think I've probably been guilty of. One is hijacking the conversation. Like, we're kind of talking to somebody, but we have a presentation we want to give, so we're just kind of waiting and looking for the right moment to kind of like pounce in and open up our monologue. Kind of at best, what that communicates to the person is like, what you were saying to me before I got into my spiel was just small talk till I could do what I wanted to do. The other thing is information overload, and I think that this one actually comes from a good place. Like somebody shows just the slightest little bit of curiosity in spiritual things, and we want to like take them all the way from Genesis to Revelation and tell them everything that we ever learned in Sunday school about Jesus and God in the Bible. The only problem is that enthusiasm is good, but most people don't like getting 3 semesters worth of like Bible study in a 20-minute conversation that they thought was just catching up over coffee with a friend. Am I the only one who's... Rachel? I think yeah, Rachel. Okay. So, also, just for fun, maybe you guys can practice these on your family or your small group later and see how it goes over. But we need to remember and be mindful of how we listen to people, because how we listen and how we talk to people, especially people who are not believers in Jesus, communicates a lot to them about whether we care about them as people or we really just care about our own thing that we want to do for ourselves. I think unfortunately we have all probably experienced that with other people, and it kind of sucks, right? Like, you kind of realize that the person you're talking to doesn't really even want to hear anything that you have to say. They just want to kind of talk at you, not talk with you. So let's not do that. So remember, as we listen as worship, right? We also listen as service. But kind of where I want to land it tonight is listening as lifestyle, which is really kind of the question, where do we go with this? How does this kind of listening really become part of our lives, like our daily life? How do we, actually engage our heart in God's mission, notice the needs of the people around us, serve them by meeting that need, and listen to them, and do it all in a way that actually communicates to them that God loves them? And be praying that God will, obviously, open the eyes of their heart, and they'll come to faith in Jesus. When I was a teenager, I had a very quiet, but very strong, stubborn streak. I'm probably the only one here, right? Now, you would never in a million years catch me like yelling at my mom, or ever saying anything like disrespectful to a teacher or a coach or a boss. But when I really decided I wanted to do something or I didn't want to do something, you would have needed a tractor to like pull me off of what I wanted to do. When I was reading this through with my wife, she laughed and was like, "When you were a teenager, you were stubborn like that?" But you know what? Since I'm probably not the only one, let's call it being strong-willed instead of being stubborn. That sounds a little better. Having a strong will is enough to change your behavior for a while, right? Like, I think most of us, if we're really honest, like if we really hunker down, we can change some of the things that we do. Like if we want to be better Christians, we can do that. If we want to serve better, listen better, if we want to notice more things, like I think we can, through sheer will, like we can do that for a while. But it's never going to change your lifestyle permanently. Like that's never going to be a permanent change just by changing your behavior, because changed behavior does not mean your heart has changed at all. Listening to God as worship helps get our heart in the right position. And why is that? It's because if we are listening to God the most, like if God is the number one thing we're listening to, that has to mean that we are listening to other things less. Right? You can't have 3 number one things. You only get 1 number one thing. And I think if most of us are like being completely honest, again from safe place, we can think of a time in our lives that God was not the number one thing that we were listening to. Not that we didn't care about God or believe in God, not that we didn't love God or go to church even, but He was not the number one voice that we were listening to. God was not the number one voice shaping what we valued or what we cared about, what we did with our money or our time or our relationships. And if it wasn't God, it was something else. You know, I said earlier that pretty much every aspect of culture, unredeemed culture, is calling us. It's inviting us to worship something other than God. Whether that's money or sex or status, influence, these things, all those things, speak very loudly in our culture right now. Right? Very loudly in the workplace if you have a job. Definitely at your school. On your sports teams. But the thing about these things is no matter how much you try, like how much you give to it, it'll never be enough to actually make you feel like you made it. Right? Like you're never actually going to be able to feel totally safe in that. Like you can kill yourself trying to find your identity in how good your grades are, what college you might get into, like what relationship you have, like the most awesome boyfriend or girlfriend in the world. Maybe your sexuality. Like maybe it's your Instagram. Maybe you could just give like 110% all day, all night to your Instagram to make it the best Instagram that has ever existed in the history of anything. But it's never enough. You know, you can chase those things. All the things that the world says will give you value, like will make you important to the world. But it'll never ever be enough, and it'll always feel short, and you'll never feel safe, and there will always be something missing. And the reason is because those things cannot communicate anything back to you, right? Like those things cannot love you back. Guys, there's only one person that can love you back. One thing worthy of your worship, and it's Jesus. And the reason He is worthy of your full attention, the reason He is worthy of being the number one thing that you listen to, is because He's already demonstrated His love for you. Romans 5:8 says, God showed His love for us, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. You know what that means? That means that while you and while I were chasing after those other things, right, that we thought would give us value, whether it was any of those things, money, is a big one in our culture. Relationships, I know is really important for you guys right now, your future stuff. But while we chase those things, desperately hoping that they will give us value, while we were ignoring Jesus, He chose to leave the glory of heaven to come here and die on the cross to rescue us. And it's in His great love that He noticed our need. He came to serve us by bringing us back into a relationship with God. And now He listens to us. He listens to us. And that, if we actually get that, like if you can grasp that, that'll change how you live your life. Like that'll change your behavior. That'll change your heart. And so we can listen to other people with compassion because Jesus listened to us. So you're going to go into your groups a little bit later and ask the question to each other, right? Like, who are you listening to? I think it's an important question. And are we okay on time again? Can I pray for you guys before the next thing? Heavenly Father, thanks for tonight. Thanks, God, for the work that you're doing in each and every person in this room. Lord, we know that there are things going on in everybody's life. Lord, that we could use help with, that we could use prayer for, that Lord, we need to listen to you more about. And so, God, I pray for the next little bit of time that these guys have to speak to one another, that your Spirit would be active and moving and guiding these conversations. Lord, that there could just be some transparency, that there could be real talk, God, of things that maybe they have been listening to, things that we all have maybe listened to more than we should. God, things that we are have tried to gain value from, tried to justify our place in the world through things other than you, God, things that we need to give up. And Lord, that it would just be a time also of encouragement, that we can encourage one another to be listening for you, and in turn, to be listening to the people around us as a way to serve them. Lord, we know that there are lonely people everywhere. Help us to notice, help us to connect with them, help us to listen well. And we pray this all in Jesus' name.